We're about to journey down a cobblestone road into 1892 Fall River, Massachusetts. It would be an honor and a privilege for you to join us. And we have a special invitation to extend. Post your own theories below. And in a few weeks, we'll do a follow up episode and report your ideas. We'll give proper credit, of course, using your screen name. Hope to see you in the comments section. Andrew Borden had just left to head downtown for his usual business. He wouldn't be back until lunch, or as they called it back then, dinner. John Morse had left maybe 20 minutes before that. He too was not expected back until lunch. But Abby didn't trust it. Morse had been meddling in their business. Something was up. Abby wanted to search the room where Morse had spent the night. Maybe Morse had left what she was looking for under the mattress. She didn't want anyone seeing what she was up to. Getting rid of Bridget was easy. She sent her out on the hottest day of the year to wash windows. The poor girl was sick, so Abby felt bad sending her out, but maybe the fresh air would do her good. That left Lizzie. Not much could be done to remove that greedy, frivolous girl. Abby could wait until the afternoon, but by then Morse would have returned, and time was running out. Those Bordens were trying to steal what was rightfully hers. What else was new? That's what Bordens did. Every Durfee knew it, from the mightiest to the poorest. She had to find the treasonous document Morse had brought with him and take it downtown to confront Andrew with it. Andrew, hard as he was, could be made to give in eventually. He was not unreasonable. He was not ungrateful. Not like those girls of his. But Lizzie was already acting suspicious. How could she keep Lizzie from following her upstairs? She found Lizzie, the woman who had once called her mother, in the kitchen preparing her irons. The girl looked up, flashed a phony smile. Abby said, "I'm going out and won't be back for a bit. I received a note shortly ago. A friend is sick. Do you want anything special for dinner?" Lizzie said anything but mutton would be a relief. "Are you feeling better?" Abby asked. "Yes, much, except I began my time this morning." Lizzie had started her period. "In fact, I must tend to matters presently." Lizzie went down the cellar to the water closet. Good. Perfect. That should keep her busy several minutes. Abby moved through the sitting room toward the front hallway. She paused at an unexpected sound, just barely audible. Deciding it must have been Bridget, perhaps returning for some reason, Abby continued upstairs to the guest room. The sound she'd heard? The screen door softly opening and closing. Fall River had been one of the first cities in the world to build mills, and it was now the biggest producer of textiles on the planet, a thriving city whose population had exploded over the last 50 years. But it was a society where your name mattered a lot. To be anyone that counted, you needed a Yankee name, a name that showed you had descended from the original English colonists who had settled the land. And there was no better name around these parts than Borden. Only one name was about as good: Durfee. Andrew had come from a line of Bordens that had lost its wealth, but he still had the name. And after a lifetime of hard work, he now had the fortune to go with it. Abby Durfee Gray likewise had come from a line that had lost its wealth, but she also had the name. Bordens and Durfees were royalty around here, Capulets and Montagues. When the area had been settled in colonial times, Bordens and Durfees owned most of the land. When the Industrial Revolution began in England, Durfees and Bordens got together and formed an alliance to bring the factories here. It succeeded brilliantly. Bordens and Durfees owned the factories, the banks, the steamships, and the rail lines. There were other good Yankee names, but Bordens and Durfees were the top of the food chain. At various points over the 2 centuries, there were marriages between the two families. After all, who was more fit to join a Borden than a Durfee, and vice versa? But having 2 equal royal lines leads eventually to rivalry, sometimes bitter rivalry. It seethed and brewed beneath the surface. Factions formed, people switched from one church's congregation to another. It was all very civil, of course. A Borden still doffed his hat to a Durfee on the street. Durfees still invited Bordens to their weddings. just like the Corleones and the Godfather invited Barzini to their daughter's wedding. Abby Durfee Gray was Andrew's second wife. She'd faithfully raised his two children. She'd dusted his furniture and had overseen his household for 30 years. She owned few dresses and was satisfied with that. Unlike Lizzie, she had no desire to live on the hill with the other aristocrats. She had no desire or need for wealth, but right was right. If Andrew died before she did, she was entitled to his estate. She intended to protect her claim, as any proud Durfee would. It was 5 years before the murders when the bitter feud between Abby and Andrew's two daughters became official, and it became fiery. Abby had a half-sister named Sarah Gray Whitehead, who was actually 4 years younger than Lizzie herself. But Abby was very close to this half-sister and was kind of a mother figure to her. Sarah also had an 8-year-old daughter who, perhaps revealingly, had been given the name Abby. In fact, Abby Borden had originally been scheduled to babysit little Abby on the day of the murders, but the illness that struck the Borden household changed that. If not for that stomach illness, the Bordens might never have been killed. We're told that Abby Borden used to visit the Whiteheads regularly, bringing baked goods and mince pies. The Whiteheads were not wealthy. George Whitehead worked as a teamster, was not healthy, and struggled to bring in money. When there was a possibility they might lose their home, Abby convinced Andrew to come to the rescue. Once again, we see that history has not been fair to poor Andrew. Here was a man who hired a maid when one wasn't needed and was not a demanding employer. In fact, he paid the maid well above standard. He allowed his girls to live in comfort, and in Lizzie's case, in luxury. And now, when Abby wanted to help the family of her half-sister, a half-sister who named her own daughter after Abby, Andrew agreed to buy the home they lived in and give it to Abby. The house cost $5,000, and this was a man who sold eggs on the street and vinegar from his house, a man who picked up broken locks and brought them home. Well, Lizzie and Emma were completely outraged. This Durfee woman was poaching what was rightly Borden wealth, their wealth. Did Abby intend to manipulate their poor father into leaving her his whole estate? They confronted their father, and he tried to fix the situation by deeding them a piece of property from which they could collect rents. And when after a few years the girls were unhappy having to act as landlords, Andrew bought the property back at a substantial markup. This put $2,500 into each of their bank accounts. But this didn't cool the fire. It didn't end the feud. Lizzie and Emma looked at Abby as an interloper who was trying to manipulate their father into giving her family what rightfully belonged to the girls, to the Bordens. But what could they do? They needed help. They needed someone who Andrew might listen to, someone not on Abby's side. There was only one person, someone Andrew had always respected, someone who was not a Durfee, someone whose sister had married into the Borden name, but who had died 30 years ago, John Vinicum Morse. Things had been building to a climax when Morse arrived the night before the murders. 2 weeks before, Lizzie had traveled by coach with Emma to New Bedford. From there, they went their separate ways. Emma proceeded to vacation on the shore, and Lizzie lingered in New Bedford. She stayed a few days in a rooming house. New Bedford is 20 miles from Fall River. Lizzie's trial would be held in New Bedford. Lizzie's lingering in Fall River was unusual. Police and prosecutors looked very hard at what she might have been doing there. They even suggested she might have been trying to buy prussic acid. But this also would have been the perfect place to meet with someone to discuss getting Andrew to sign a will. Victoria Lincoln published one of the more famous books on Lizzie Borden. She had grown up a few houses from where Lizzie lived as an older woman, and her family was from the same Yankee circles as the Bordens and the Durfees. According to Lincoln, what triggered Lizzie to kill her parents was her discovery of a secret conspiracy by Andrew. Lincoln claimed inside knowledge of this through her family, some of whom were bank executives. Remember the farm we've talked about Andrew owning? This farm was in Swansea, a little village across the river. According to Lincoln, Andrew was in the process of deeding the farm to Abby, and he was going to let Morse take over management of it. They were said to take great pains to make sure Lizzie was kept in the dark. Lincoln even speculates that Abby was supposed to meet Andrew that morning downtown to sign the deed. But Lizzie caught wind of it, and her hatchet made sure it didn't happen. Lincoln might be warm to something, But her conclusion makes no sense. Why would Andrew deed the property to Abby if he wanted Morse to manage it? We can give you a more sensible version of events, and Abby was not in on it at all. We can explain to you what Victoria Lincoln did not figure out. Andrew did intend to deed the Swansea farm to Abby, and Morse was centrally involved, but as an ally and agent of Lizzie and Emma, not of Abby. Morse, acting on behalf of the daughters, was coaxing Andrew to sign a will, leaving his estate to the girls. But Abby had to be provided for. So under the plan hatched by the girls and their uncle, Abby would get the Swansea farm. It was a very Borden solution. The Borden women would have his many downtown properties, including his pride and joy, the new Andrew J. Borden building. They would have his wealth. They would be able to run his properties from 2nd Street. The girls knew nothing about business, but Andrew's business manager, Charles Cook, would take care of that. He lived near the Bordens. His daughter was a close friend of Lizzie's. His grandfather had officiated Andrew's wedding. These were Borden men. Victoria Lincoln speculates that the murders were triggered by Lizzie catching wind of what was going on. But it was the other way around. Abby caught wind of the scheme put in place by Lizzie and Emma and John Morse, and she intended to stop it. No Durfee worth the name would get bowled over in a scheme like that. John Morse had arrived the night before, seemingly with nothing in hand. But not trusting Morse, Abby had spied on them when Andrew and he were alone, and she'd seen Morse withdraw papers from his coat. So she watched him closely that morning. Didn't seem to have those papers on him when he left, which meant they must be upstairs in the guest room. She knew what those papers had to be. A will. Thank you for joining us on our journey down a cobblestone road into 1892 Fall River. Please check out the next and last episode in this series, which will reveal the killer hiding in plain sight. Have you figured it out yet? And we'd like to make you a little offer. Start a conversation below one of these videos, and we'll thank you by having a narrator recognize you in the next video. Any support you give us means a lot, so please click subscribe. And if you're feeling extra generous, click like. Thank you.